Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Another edition of the New Orleans Humanist Perspective. My name is Charlotte Clausen, president of the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, which is the sponsor of this program, and I will be your host for today's show. First, let me introduce my guest and tell you a little bit about them. We have Clara Fernandez, a New Orleans native, was born into the Soka Gakkai International Buddhist practice, but fully embraced it 8 years ago. She is a South Zone Young Women's Division leader within SGI, which covers 8 states in the South. And then we have Mindy, Milam, also a New Orleans native, who is a clinical social worker in private practice. She joined SGI 15 years ago and is the regional representative for peace and community relations. So Mindy and Clara, welcome to our program today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us here.
I thought we would start out with a few questions to get us on the topic of what is Nichiren Buddhism and how does it differ from other sects of Buddhism? So,
Great.
Clara.
That's a great question. So, Nichiren Buddhism was formed by Nichiren Daishonin. He was a 13th century monk in Japan, and at the time he was really looking for a philosophy, a practice that would really help people become happy in this lifetime. And upon studying the different sutras, which are the different teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, also known as Shakyamuni, where Buddhism originated from in India, he found out that the Lotus Sutra actually embodies the highest teachings. And what he meant by the highest teachings was that in this sutra, Shakyamuni realized that everyone can attain enlightenment in this lifetime and has the ability to do it no matter what class that they're born into, which was a very important factor that that Nichiren Daishonin was really looking for, because at the time people were limited by the class that they were born into and felt that their destiny was limited to just what they were born with. So Nichiren Daishonin found that the Lotus Sutra embodied that, and in the Lotus Sutra, he developed a practice that can be accessible to all people by chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which translates into devotion to the mystic law of cause and effect through sound and vibration. And that essentially is the title of the Lotus Sutra. And in Nichiren Buddhism, we practice from that sutra, the Lotus Sutra.
Okay. And just one point of that about the status of someone's life, that was probably very important to have something that almost has equality in it, that everyone, not that if you're a king or a peasant, you
also
can have
a woman.
or a woman, right? Gender issues. So I just think that's kind of fascinating that would have been thought of way back then. So.
I'll add to that that's one of the things that really was very appealing to me about Nichiren Buddhism is the emphasis on equality of all people. And in letters that Nichiren wrote to his followers, many times he references equality between men and women, which if you think of the cultural context in 13th century Japan is very radical, and very radical to also say that every person is equal. And I think to add to more information to your question about how this Buddhism differs from other types of Buddhism, there's a book that I will just hold up called Waking the Buddha, and it was written by Clark Strand, who is a former Zen Buddhist monk, and he wrote this to really describe how SGI, Soka Gakkai International, which is the organization that practices Nichiren Buddhism, what a revolutionary organization and practice we have, because other types of Buddhism focus more, my understanding is, and I'm not an expert in other types of Buddhism, my understanding is that other types of Buddhism focus on things that help people quiet their mind, develop an internal awareness of things to be able to deal with life better. From our perspective, when we chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, we're accessing our inherent enlightenment, our inherent courage or compassion or wisdom, strength, so that we can tackle life's problems. So other types of Buddhism, say a retreat, a meditation retreat, when I've read about meditation retreats, the goal might be to help people unplug and remove themselves from society. Our emphasis is actively engaging in society. But in order to do that, we have to first work on ourselves so that we're coming from the best place so we can actually live a contributive life. So one of the distinctions, as I understand it, and as Clark talks about in this book, I was just reviewing it again today, was that instead of using Buddhism to turn inward, that we really are wanting to revolutionize the planet. In terms of everyone living a life that recognizes the value and dignity of every human's life, and of living a philosophy and accessing a practice that enables people to live to their highest potential and know we have a responsibility to each other. So it's not enough for me to just, and there's nothing wrong with meditation. I encourage clients to meditate to help manage life stressors, but that's about our brain, and this practice is about accessing inherent potential and really living our best lives.
Okay, well that's very fascinating. I was curious, how many sects of Buddhism are there? Just a ballpark, how many that you might know of?
Almost thousands.
Oh,
probably thousands.
Okay. I didn't know if there were so many major sects, and that was part of it.
Well, there's different branches. So the two branches, there's Hinayana and Mahayana.
Oh, okay.
And we're under the Mahayana branch, which translates into greater vehicle. And greater vehicle essentially means that in our practice, we engage in society. And so that's why in our practice, it's not just about how can we attain enlightenment, but also how can we help other people as well. And so that's why we're not in a lifestyle where we're separated from society and focusing just on the meditation or just on the practice of attaining our enlightenment, but engaging with people on a daily basis and having, just regular professions, where we encounter people all the time and share this with other people.
Right.
And if I could just add one more thing to that, the idea of enlightenment is can be defined in numerous ways, but one way of looking at enlightenment is having the capacity to know, I'm going to say that differently, having the ability to recognize we have the capacity to handle any of life's problems, so that we don't turn away from problems, but really look at problems as the fuel to help us, to motivate us, to drive us in the direction of revealing even more of our potential.
Okay. Okay. Well, one of the things that I think we had touched on before the show was how similar a lot of the Nichiren Buddhism is to secular humanists, or humanism in that way. I had pulled a passage that I just very brief that I would like to read. The essence of Buddhism is the conviction that we have within us at each moment the ability to overcome any problem or difficulty that we may encounter in life, a capacity to transform any suffering. And the thing that meant a lot to me, or it resonated, was that it has to do with our capacity affecting the world and affecting life in general. And I think humanism, secular humanism, talks about the fact that we don't look outward to solve our problems, that it really comes down to us, that is how we have evolved. And so I think that's kind of a fascinating overlap in the belief. And so I wanted to put that out there as far as what you've taken from that, how it is similar to secular humanism.
And Nichiren Buddhism is described as a humanistic religion. In that way, again, they're very compatible. I think the difference is we would go another step saying that through chanting, that we believe any person has the capacity, again, to access our inherent best selves, where our minds are deluded. But that through chanting we access a higher wisdom within ourselves. So it's not like y'all, it's not looking outside of ourselves for the answer. It's taking responsibility for our lives and for the happiness of other people as well.
Right. So the chanting is, a tool that we use to really help access that, because on a daily basis, it can be very challenging, and we acknowledge that, in our practice, that it can be very challenging to always be our best self, right?
Oh,
and so
definitely.
that's why we have this practice, so that it reminds us how can we always access that highest self, that enlightenment, and that it's a daily practice, right? So I just wanted to emphasize that too.
I guess in some ways, just briefly, unless we might want to skip around, you've kind of touched on the fundamental principles of Nichiren Buddhism. I had wondered how most people come to Nichiren in their lives. I mean, if there is something that you see as an ongoing similarity in their lives, that and how it's they use it to help their lives. I mean, is there a common story that people come to Buddhism later in life, perhaps, that's very similar, or is it just as diverse as the people are themselves? I just didn't know what kind of, maybe if there was a little path that you see a lot of people take.
It's as diverse as the people themselves. Because everyone's life is different and unique, and different reasons for wanting to join, which is also a wonderful aspect of our practice, is that it's for everyone. We have a diverse population that practices here. How many people practice here in New Orleans, you would say?
I want to say probably maybe 375, 400 members here
in the New Orleans, greater New Orleans area. So, but it's also practiced in 192 countries. So that speaks to a lot of the diversity of our practice as well. But again, with that question, though, and I think this can lead into our own experiences as to why we started practicing. So I was born into this practice. But just as I think many people who are born into a faith, there's always a time when you're questioning and you want to find out if there's anything else out there. And so I went through a period like that. But then 8 years ago, I experienced some health problems, and it was breathing issues, it was anxiety. Turned out to be anxiety attacks. And so I went to what I knew, which is what I was raised with, was Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. And so I started to chant, and I chanted to overcome this. Now, I'll preface this by saying that Buddhism is reason. So we don't say this is a magic practice where if you're having an ailment, you can chant it away. That's not the kind of practice it is, right? So in my case, though, I was really chanting to overcome what was at the root of the suffering of this in my life that was creating this anxiety for me. And eventually, I was able to overcome my anxiety, but more importantly, I was able to really release the fear that I had. So anytime I had an anxiety attack again, I was able to actually look at it objectively and have the courage to face it head on. And I directly attribute that to the daily practice that I really started 8 years ago.
So it was kind of like having power over it. So you kept practicing and got stronger. And little by little, it became something that just clicked.
Yes, yes, exactly. So you wanted to share anything to that?
And I think I would add, in terms of what brings people to the practice, people come for many reasons. Some people are suffering and are looking for tools to help them manage their lives better. When I first was told about this practice by a friend who said, Mindy, you would love to know about this Buddhism. And I said, oh, don't talk to me about religion. My grandfather was a minister. I'd grown up in a Christian faith and at one time was a Sunday school teacher in my life. And as I got older, just started feeling more what that offered me felt empty to me. And I started reading the Dalai Lama because I was interested in understanding how other religions could not be for peace. And it's what drew me to Buddhism. Why have a religion that advocated killing of life? And Buddhism is, I believe, the only religion that doesn't kill in its name, typically. And so anyway, I started reading about Buddhism, and it was hard for me when I was looking into other Buddhisms as a lifelong feminist, felt very committed to finding, if I was going to find a spiritual practice, find something that respected that. And when I encountered this Buddhism and when I chanted, I felt like it was absolutely the right place for me. And I also was very skeptical and looked for anything that seemed inconsistent or incongruent, and have now been practicing 15 years and am still stunned to find an organized religion. And we're both a religion and a philosophy, but to find something that resonates 100% with my values, that embraces diversity and difference and celebrates difference and talks about, the ways that each of us has a unique purpose in our lives, and it's up to us to awaken to that, and that we also to have an organized way through chanting to overcome the limitations that I place on myself through my brain, and also to meet other people. If you came to a meeting, you would find a very diverse group of people. Churches sometimes are the most segregated places in life, and so to see a place that really represents the globe and that's striving for happiness. This Buddhism says the purpose of life is for us to become happy. And growing up in the church, I didn't really hear about happiness, nor did I hear about equality, nor did I hear about fundamental respect for life and encouraging people really to be themselves versus to conform and be afraid. This is not fear-based, and it's based in internal freedom. So happiness is not the absence of problems, but it's knowing that we have the capacity within us to solve whatever problem we're facing. And having those tools absolutely has enriched my life. And I love our members. I love our practice. I just love everything about it.
And one thing you said, you said the word that was kind of in my mind, that so often religion is kind of used to develop conformity or to impose conformity within a community or society, and to have an opportunity for individuality to perhaps be because very clearly, if people come to it from different aspects, different areas of pain or confusion or sadness, then it is very individual. And yet to go into a religion, you would say, well, then sometimes you're leaving part of your individuality behind. And that's kind of a fascinating part of it, that perhaps that helps nurture that in people. So that was just the word conformity, to try to not, and to not have that perhaps is a huge element, I'm sure, for a lot of people. I guess one thing that we could talk about is the Soka Gakkai International being an organization, and how is that structured? How does that apply to your practices?
Sure. So Soka Gakkai International, it started with a grassroots movement, actually, in Japan. Mm-hmm. So we have the history, right, of Nichiren Buddhism that started in 13th century Japan. Mm-hmm. But then in 1928, there was an educator, and his name was Mitsuru Tsunetsaburo Makiguchi. And he was looking for a philosophy, something, a belief system that would really support his pedagogy. Because at the time, education was not really directed towards the happiness, and fostering value for the students. Mm-hmm. So in search of something, he found Nichiren Daishonen's Buddhism. And when he found Nichiren Daishonen's Buddhism, he realized that this practice of Buddhism is directly aligned, specifically, again, the Lotus Sutra, right? The teachings of the Lotus Sutra are directly aligned to his pedagogy and his belief system that everyone can attain enlightenment, that everyone can become happy. And so he started a society called Soka Kyoku Gakkai, which translates into Value-Creating Educators Society. Mm-hmm. And that society was really focused on how we can really use the mission statement and the principles of this Buddhism in our life, in our education system. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, he faced great opposition because Japan had a religion that was mandated. It was a national religion, which was Shintoism. Mm. And because he refused to revoke his beliefs, he was imprisoned, and so was his disciple who was studying under him, right? So they were imprisoned, and eventually he passed away in prison. And then his disciple, Josei Toda, carried out this practice and spread it throughout Japan. And then after him came the third president, which is our current president, Daisaku Ikeda, who is responsible for spreading this practice all throughout 192 countries. Mm. So I explain all of this because that whole title of Soka Gakkai, it came directly from these three educators, starting this as an organization so that we can also, which we can explain a little bit about how it's structured. It's structured in a way so that when a person becomes a member and starts practicing, there's a network, a community that's supporting them in their practice too, because it's a practice for ourselves, but also a practice of how we can help other people too. So maybe you can add to that about more specifically how it's structured.
And I think what I will add to the history Clara gave is that President Makaguchi and Toda were imprisoned, as she said, during World War II by Japan. And so when President Makaguchi died in prison, as they were both imprisoned as thought criminals because they would not revoke this Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And when President Toda came out of jail post-war, Japan was decimated. We had bombed them. People were living in absolute poverty and were desperate. And so it's really kind of amazing to look at the history that President Toda only lived another 8 years after his release from prison, and in that time this Buddhism spread from maybe a couple of thousand people to 750,000 households. Mm-hmm. And at that point, when President Toda died, the next person, as she said, Daisaku Ikeda, who is our president now still, and he's 89 years old, he had TB and was told he wouldn't live past 32 or something. And even though he's not college educated, he has written over 100 books, has over 350 honorary doctorates, has held dialogues with major world leaders. He's a prolific writer. And every year for the last 30-something years, I think, has written a peace proposal to the United Nations. And he's an amazing man. yet. But what he writes about is, you have the exact same capacity as me. So we don't look at President Ikeda as anything above us, more enlightened than us, but rather as a teacher for us to see what can happen when a person, he was born to fisherman parents, you know, when a person really takes this practice to heart and takes on their mission, what they can accomplish in their lifetime. So in 1960, President Ikeda left Japan to bring this Buddhism to other countries. And now so since 1960 to now, we're in 192 countries. So the spread actually is phenomenal for being such a young religion, but it's very grassroots. And so all the leadership, when Clara mentioned she was a leader, I'm the region person for peace and community relations, all of the leadership roles are all volunteer. So it's part of our desire to support the principles of this organization, the members of this organization, and to let other people know we're here. Right. We're spread, mostly by word of mouth. By saying, oh my, Clara, I'm doing the most amazing thing in my life, and you're struggling right now, and let me tell you about chanting. And so that's really, it's very grassroots. But yeah, so the structure, in this city, we meet once a month by geographical areas called districts for discussion meetings where we study. This is a Living Buddhism magazine. We study writings from that. We encourage each other. We have a community center here where we every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. we get together and chant as a community. We have intro meetings every Monday night. But all of the tasks that are done, they're all done by volunteers. Right. So, again, it's not like we have a paid minister or anything like that, which also speaks to our passion about it.
Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, then, I guess, if people did a search, if they just said Buddhism New Orleans, they would find you? Is that right? I mean, you have a website and all of that.
I think if somebody just said Buddhism New Orleans, they might find 5 or 6 different sects of Buddhism.
Oh, I see. So there are other
I think if someone was going to search for
SGI USA.
Yes,
in New Orleans.
So that's essential. The SGI part is essential. Okay, I'm glad we touched on that since we're getting really close to the end of the show, just so people would know that would be a way to learn more.
Yes.
Okay.
Our community center is on Britannia, right across the street from Seed Restaurant, which many people know. Britannia and Thalia.
Oh, okay.
And
so
every Monday night,
Garden District area. I mean, is that technically Garden District? Okay.
Every Monday night we have intro meetings, and SGI's website, sgiusa.org, sgi-usa.org, has a wealth of information. But what we also believe is in dialogue and touching people like life to life and heart to heart. So even if somebody's interested, I think if they came to a meeting versus just looked on the website, they would have a different experience
definitely.
of it.
We just always like to make sure we let a person talk about that. How I mean the internets and interwebs that we do.
Definitely SGI-USA.org is the best way, because then through that website it's so organized that you can connect to the directories of anywhere in the United States.
Well, it looks like we are at the end of our program, so thank you for joining us, and please tune in next month for a new show. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Thank you.